Hey guys, welcome to the Son of Wonder. We have a very new and interesting episode of the Bad Batch this week. Episode 9. 9? Let's conversationalize. What up guys? So this week's episode, again, like I said, very interesting and intriguing. And it's funny because I guarantee you that for any of you who've been watching my videos talking about the episodes before, and, getting my thoughts on the different episodes and how some of them might be filler, you might have watched this one already and been like, Son of Wonder, this was pretty much a filler episode. It didn't do much. I actually, funnily enough, would disagree. I actually really enjoyed this episode. I think it was a very simple episode, and I think that's what worked for it. And I'll get into why and, why it worked for me so well as I review it. So it starts off, the Bad Batch go to this unnamed planet to get some special material for Sid, some special element, and it's called Ipsium. And you know that in the writing room, they were going over the storyboard, going over the drawings, and Omega slips on some of the Ipsium, or a rock near the Ipsium later, and they were probably like, oh yeah, you see, so Omega's slipping on the Ipsium, or she's slipping on a rock near it, right, and she's gonna fall. So, she's gonna slip, and the other guys are like, she's gonna slip? I don't really see what you're talking about. No, she's gonna slip. See him? She's gonna slip. See him? And then they were like, oh, maybe that's what we should call the element. But Slipsium doesn't sound right. That kind of sound too goofy. I got it. Let's cut off the S and the L so we can just have Ipsium. Oh my gosh, Dave. I love it. That's fantastic. Let's totally go with it. It's the best element name ever. You know that it was the exact story and the exact way it played out in the writing room for that episode.
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Anyway, point being, they're after this substance called Ipsium, which is highly volatile. If it's any contact, any friction with it at all, could cause it to explode. So we're dealing with basically the Star Wars version of uranium, which we've had similar substances like that before. I think one was called Coffeeum. I think the other one was called Rhydonium. It was featured in Rebels. Again, very explosive material, similar to this. But this sounds even more dangerous. But they're trying to get this substance for Sid. And I know I've mentioned before that I'm really not a fan of the Sid arc anymore. Them just doing a bunch of different missions for Sid, because I haven't really found a lot of the stories that interesting that involve her involvement. But this one, I think, again, it's the simplicity of it. It's that they go to this planet, and they try to mine the Ipsium. And throughout it, you can tell that Omega is upset about something, and that there's kind of a hint that she doesn't really feel like the Bad Batch trusts her to do certain jobs very much. She is the one who's tasked with mining the Ipsium, I think because she's the only one small enough to get up to the place where it was to mine it. And honestly, what was going through my head at that moment was, you're going to trust a small child to mine this highly volatile and explosive substance that could potentially kill all of you in a snap, like Thanos? Maybe not the best idea. So I didn't really trust her either. So maybe she needs to come have a pep talk or, therapist session with me, because I wasn't really very trusting of her either. But she does it, and you can tell she kind of feels annoyed by the certain amount of distrust that the Bad Batch is conveying to her. But you can tell she's also upset about something else. Anyway, their ship gets stolen. The Marauder gets stolen from the Bad Batch while they're mining the substance. And here's what's very interesting. They did not reveal the identity of who stole the Marauder in this episode. Hunter said that Sid mentioned that there were a lot of poachers around in the area that they were on the planet. So, people who steal ships, in this case. And the guy who steals the Marauder, the clothes he's wearing, and even his height and his helmet All of those things to me evoke Hondo Ohnaka from Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. He is one of my favorite Star Wars side characters. He's one of the funniest characters. He has some of the best one-liners in all of Star Wars, if you've seen those animated series. He is the best. And I was hoping so much for a cameo from him somewhere, like in Mando Season 3 or Bad Batch. I was really hoping for one. And so when I saw the specific clothes that he was wearing, which are clothes that usually Hondo Ohnaka likes to wear, I was like, could we be getting some Hondo Ohnaka cameo? The guy takes the Marauder and leaves, and he never comes back. But this is clearly, based on the way this episode ends, as a two-parter episode, so it's very possible he could, and it's very possible that that could be, indeed, Hondo Ohnaka. So I am totally game if that happens to be the case. Once they realize their ship is stolen, they see a storm coming for them, a pretty violent storm, so they start heading to the nearest town to try to get a ship there to leave the planet. And it was funny, before that, while they were mining, Omega was like fiddling with a rock in her hand. And, you know, you probably would be like, wow, you're talking about a rock? That's just sad. But it was just interesting the way that they focused on it in her hand. It was like, why would you focus on her just messing around with a rock? And there was a certain part of how like the rock was moving. Again, I could be completely going nuts here. I could have completely lost my mind. My brain could be gone. But I think it is possible that the reason they kind of focused on this little moment was to imply some Force sensitivity. I still hold true to that theory that Omega could very well be Force sensitive. They have given several hints in this season alone, and I just think it's pretty possible. But anyway, the Bad Batch head to the town. They start hearing some heavy rumbling in the ground, and there's a stampede after them. Or not after them, but running toward them, running away from the storm that's coming. So they have to find a way to escape that. And it's funny, because even some of the camera angles that they used to shoot the stampede, I was getting some seriously heavy Mufasa Lion King vibes. And what was even funnier is that at one moment, Wrecker has to jump down from the piece of stone that they're on to get the Ipsium so it doesn't blow up, to protect it. So he's kind of cradled on it as the stampede is running over him. And I'm thinking to myself, Wrecker just survived what Mufasa couldn't. That's impressive. And Mufasa is James Earl Jones, and James Earl Jones is Darth Vader, so that means that Wrecker survived something that Darth Vader couldn't. So that's even more impressive. Impressive. Most impressive. But anyway, they get out of that situation fairly okay, and they end up finding this other mine, and they try to escape in it, but the storm hits them, and during the storm they lose the Ipsium they already had, so they go inside, and the Ipsium ends up getting pushed in to the rock above the mine, above the opening of the mine, and it blows up the rock and barricades the doorway, so they can't get out. And they're trying to move the stones, but it's really not doing anything. And it's during this time that we get kind of the main meat of the episode, and that is like Omega's conflict, or rather her sadness. And I'm really glad we got these moments, because it wouldn't have really, like, they came off such a high with 7 and 8 of just that intense, I heard somebody call it a political thriller, and that's exactly what it was. And, you know, with Echo leaving, making you cry, they came off such a high with that it would have been weird to not acknowledge the previous events in this episode and just have it be a solely filler episode, blah, 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 not much there. But they actually chose to make this episode meaningful still by giving Omega this arc that she needs to go through after the loss of Echo, even though, like Hunter says, they didn't really lose him, but, you know, he's still not with them, as Omega points out. And she's very sad about this. And Tech is mainly the one that doesn't seem to show any sensitivity toward her plight. Because Tech is a very logical thinker, very statistical, logistical, you know, he doesn't really focus on the emotion of situations. Like, Omega is very emotional, and he is almost not at all emotional. Not in a heartless, cold way, per se, but still, he doesn't really have much emotion. So, he's kind of the main one that offends her, and then it causes her to want to be alone for a while. She ends up finding this more of the Ipsium, and when she tries to mine it, Hunter and Wrecker explain to Tech that he needs to go talk to Omega after what he said, and Tech goes to her, and again, there's that feeling of distrust about like Omega feeling that, you know, Tech doesn't trust her, and she wants him to trust her. And then when she starts to mine this one piece of Ipsium that's a bit far away from her ledge that she's standing on, she falls into the pit. And she grabs on the side of the rock. Tech tries to grab her, and it was at this moment that I was thinking, it would be insane if they actually let her fall. Like, I would not expect that. Usually in these kind of scenarios, especially with the animated stuff, they just grab her and it's like a quick little like, oh no, is she okay? And then we're done. At that moment, I was like, that would up the stakes a little bit for me if she actually fell into this black abyss that we don't know what's inside of them. And she does. She actually does. And I was like, whoa, dang. They practically killed Omega. They've got some serious guts. Then, the even more awesome part is that Tech, who's, again, he's the science guy. He's the smarts guy. He's not really, you know, not that he isn't willing, clearly, but he's not the first person to, like, jump into the fray and go into battle. He's the strategy guy. But he doesn't even barely take a moment to think, and he just jumps into the pit after Omega, having absolutely no idea what's down there, or where she could have fallen. She could have fallen on the concrete and died, then Tech would have followed suit. So he had no idea what was down there, and yet still, Captain Logistical Strategical Thinker, I have to plan out every situation before I act on it, just jumps into the pit, no problem. And I feel like that was Dave Filoni's way of saying, Tech is a man and he has a heart. And that was a very brave and courageous thing to do, and I'm so glad they showed that side of him. We are getting more of him in this season specifically, and I have enjoyed it. I have enjoyed seeing more of him, more of his perspectives on things than we have previously, because he was always just pretty much the Q, like the James Bond Q of the Bad Batch. Anyway, great for them. They end up falling in a river in the rapids, and they end up getting washed in this waterfall into this pool with what looks like a bunch of Ipsium. And they, you know, climb back on shore. Wrecker and Hunter check in to make sure they're okay. They say yes. And then we get a very heartfelt moment between Tech and Omega, where Omega basically questioned Tech's sympathy. From her perspective, again, the most emotional person of the group, of the Bad Batch, and then the least emotional person in the Bad Batch, have this conversation with each other. And I really was hoping that Tech would finally open up. That he would finally be honest from a human perspective rather than a science, almost robot-like one. And he did. And I was so grateful for that, you know, Dave Filoni allowed Tech to have those moments. But the main thing that's bothering Omega is that Echo is gone, and he's not with the Bad Batch anymore, and they just lost the Marauder, which is also a big part of her upbringing with the Bad Batch. She even says it's their home, and it basically is. It's her childhood home, the Marauder is. So she's all torn up about both of those things. They're eating at her. And Omega basically says, everything's changing, why don't you care? And Tech is like, well, I'm well aware that you miss Echo, but we just need to move on. We're going to find a way. We're like we always do. We're going to find a way to get out of this. And Tech says, like, we're soldiers. That's what we do. We're supposed to move on. And Omega's like, but we're family, though. Like, we're more than just soldiers. We're a family, but you don't act like it. And I love in that moment, Techo, I almost said Techo there. Tech has this really long pause, like I just did, where he's really trying to think of an answer. And instead of saying the more logical, like, well, okay, you'll be fine, whatever, he's like, Echo and Crosshair both, and I like how he mentioned Crosshair, chose their own path. And I have to respect that. Which is funny, though, because I don't really respect Crosshair's path because he chose to be evil, but nonetheless, he said, I have to respect that. And even though we do miss Echo, and we do want the whole band to be together, we still have to accept when they're not. And even though I may think differently, I may process things differently, I don't feel any less than you do. That is awesome to give this, again, all Tech Tech, all science, all logic guy, this kind of arc that they usually don't give those kind of guys, those kind of characters in movies and shows. They usually don't give them an emotion or a meaningful arc. They're almost always just there to relay information and scientifically get the protagonist out of tough situations. But they allowed Tech this moment of like, even though I may not show it, I still feel the same things you do, even though I may process it differently. And I just think that's such a cool place to take Omega and Tech's relationship, because Omega and Echo's relationship was already very interesting, especially as elaborated on at the beginning of this series with those first 2 episodes. And doing this with Omega and Tech is just, I feel like it's profound. It has that element to it, and it gives me the feels. And if they had hugged, I might have cried, but they didn't hug, so I didn't cry. But still, I think I would have been close for sure. But then they hear Wrecker screaming as he and Hunter tumble down the waterfall. They use the epipsium or whatever it's called to blow up this part in the wall that they've realized can be blown up to help them escape. They see the town as soon as they walk out of the mine. And it was weird to me because earlier they had said that it was a really long way to the nearest town. And even when they were at the Stampede area, they still said it was a long way. And they hadn't traveled very far when they entered the mine. And they still hadn't really traveled very far from the inside of the mine to the extra ipsium they found. So I don't know how they just managed to stumble upon the town that should have been really far away. But, I guess just whatever. But they go to the town. It's abandoned, but they use a transponder they found there to send out a radio signal to contact Sid, which, funnily enough, unironically enough, does not choose to help them, at least not immediately. After all the Bad Batch have done for them, after Sid sent them on this mission. This was Sid's whole thing. This was her whole idea. This is something that she wanted done for her by using the Bad Batch, as she's done for many occasions, and she still wouldn't help them immediately. And even as much as they say, we don't have enough days, if you're going to be here in a few days even, we still can't hold out that long. We don't have enough food. And Sid's being pretty mean, and she's like, well, I don't need a recap of all the things you've done for me. When they start repeating them off to her to get her to help, she's like, well, I'll be there in a few days, but I'm kind of busy right now. Very kind of snotty, and it really just makes you not like her. And I don't really know if you're even supposed to. I don't know if you were ever really supposed to that much anyway. And the stuff that I mentioned probably would be reoccurring from episode 4 is, I think now, coming back at least a little bit. I don't know if it's full fold yet, but it's coming back at least a little bit in this episode because of her resistance to help the Bad Batch. After all the generosity they've shown her by even doing the tasks she's asked of, which a lot of them all of them end up being pretty dangerous. But they still do them. They need money to survive, but I really wish they would find a different way to do it, because she is not very nice when it comes down to it. But yeah, she doesn't help them immediately, and then the storm closes in on them. And then Omega then says, we'll find a way to get out of this. We always do. Echoing, see what I did there, what Tech said earlier to her. And they kind of had this slow nod to each other when she says that. And I really appreciated that. That felt like the payoff to their relationship and their dynamic and that conversation. But the last shot is the storm closing in on them in this small little abandoned town. And them all standing together as a family, like Omega said. And it's just so cool. And so I think this episode was still pretty good. Maybe even really good. For completely different reasons than the previous 2 were. The previous 2 gave you everything. It gave you Coruscant. It gave you the Senate. It gave you Emperor Palpatine. It gave you Senator Organa. It gave you Senator Chuchi from Clone Wars. It gave you all the things. All bits of intrigue. Then this one gives you a very simple story, but well-written story, with the Bad Batch on this planet. And what I especially appreciated about it was, unlike so many of the other Bad Batch episodes, there was no monster that came and attacked them. There was no sudden and convenient for the writers threat of danger to give the story more urgency. It was just, they were there, they were stranded, different natural things happened, like, yeah, sure, a stampede happened and a storm happened. And again, these are very subtle, natural occurrences. It's not like a special case of like, there's a monster attacking us, we gotta run away. It's just them in these situations having to work it out. Basically battling against the planet that they're on more so than like one tangible threat. And I really appreciated the simplicity of that because it allowed a lot of time for character development that they used wisely in this episode, whereas I didn't feel like they used it as nearly as wisely in the Gunji episode, or the Jedi Wookiee episode. This episode felt like a better version of that one. Where yes, not a ton was going on in terms of like moving the story forward, but Omega's story was definitely moved, and so is Tech's. Character development there that the dynamics I really enjoyed. So that is my review of Bad Batch Season 2, Episode 9. I really enjoyed it. I think we're still on a roll, and I'm very curious to see where the second part leads us. Hopefully, maybe it's even a 3-parter or whatever, but hopefully it will lead to Hondo Ohnaka. It will lead to Hondo Ohnaka! And I can get to repeat all of the one-liners that he said from Clone Wars and Rebels to you guys in the next video. So, thank you guys for watching. I know you're going to enjoy that. Have a very blessed day. May the Lord be with you. May the Force be with you. Goodbye. And that's a wrap.